to the keynote fireside on day 2 of ET Future of Jobs Summit. I'm Maloni Bhatt. The summit is our attempt to delve into not just the jobs and skills needed for a future-ready workforce, but also to get a sense, a roadmap to meet the challenges that must be addressed to ensure that the growth is sustainable and inclusive. My guest is a public policy expert, author, and columnist, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. He's the founder CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water, which is among the world's leading climate think tanks. He is an advisor to governments, industry, and international organizations the world over. He currently serves on the Government of India's G20 Finance Track Advisory Group and advises the Sherpa Track for India's G20 presidency, apart from serving on other international forums. Arunabha, welcome. And we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on why sustainability and tech will be the key to future jobs.
Hi, Melanie, and many thanks for having me as part of this important Future of Jobs Summit. Looking forward to the conversation.
It's our pleasure to have you, Arunabha. My first question to you is that India wants to actually transition to net zero by 2070. And a recent report published by the World Economic Forum said that this could give India the opportunity to create 50 million jobs. Now, give us a sense on which sectors of the green economy will we see most of the jobs, and how do you see sustainability coming into play, and how do you see that impacting standard of living?
Well, the first thing we have to understand is that the move towards net zero for the economy as a whole is actually not an energy transition, it's an economic transformation, which means that whether it's the technologies or the jobs or the businesses or the markets or consumer preferences, everything that we've known in the past is not going to be a predictor of the future. And that's the frame within which the future of jobs also has to be considered. So if you take a few different sectors, which would be growth drivers, we see huge opportunity in jobs coming through. Let's take renewables. CEW, my organization, and our partners, NRDC, we regularly do a survey on the number of jobs created in large-scale solar and wind and so forth. We estimate that already over 111,000 jobs have been created in large-scale solar and wind. We estimate there are more than 200,000 jobs that are already there in distributed renewables. But the big targets that India has set forward for 2030 of 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity by 2030, we estimate this will create a workforce of over 1 million people, but full-time equivalent jobs of over 3.5 million. Now, that's only up to 2030, and we have 4 more decades beyond for renewables. For instance, solar will grow up to 5.6 million megawatts of solar by 2070. So you can imagine how much jobs will be created there. Let's take another example, mobility. There's a big push for electric mobility. Just between 2019 and 2022, we've seen a 6-fold increase in the number of sales of electric mobility. But by 2030 again, when we hope to have 30% of all new sales to be electric, we estimate again well over 150, 120,000 jobs to be created in that sector alone. More recently, green hydrogen, the national mission on green hydrogen has been announced and approved by the Union Cabinet, and also a huge amount of money has been allocated to it by the finance minister. We estimate that over the next 2.5 decades, there's going to be about another 1.6 to 1.9 million jobs created in the green hydrogen supply chain. Then let's look at cooling. We are a hot tropical country, so sustainable cooling will be a major growth driver. Now, we have 200,000 AC technicians in the country today. We estimate that over the course of the next 1.5 decades or so, about 2 million such jobs will be created. So I can go on and on and on, but the real point here is that the driver of the economy will be the energy transition and the green economy story. Green growth was one of the Saptarishis in the finance minister's speech. And if you then look at each of those sectors, we see an exponential increase in jobs potential across the value chain.
Right. So these are good figures, very encouraging. But, workers in the energy sector will need to transition from, a coal-led model into the green economy. What sort of a roadmap do you envisage that we need to ensure that there are livelihoods and jobs? And whatever roadmap has been set out by the government at this point in time, how achievable are those goals to?
Well, let's start with your second question, Melanie. How achievable depends on not just setting out a roadmap or setting out a target. That's very important because it sets the direction of travel, but it also needs to be backed up with technology and investment. And just note that I'm not talking about finance, because finance is often talked about in the context of what the government will do. What the government can do is to catalyze markets. What we need is hard investment. So if we have a target of, say, 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity, it means that every hour, for 10 hours a day, for 6 days a week, for 52 weeks a year, taking no breaks, we have to deploy about 10.5 megawatts of renewables. That's a breathless marathon that India will be on. It will be the first major economy that seeks to build out more renewables than its entire electricity system as it exists today. No one's done this before. So if we do it, it'll be pioneering in the world. But in order for that to happen, then the finances to flow exactly when you're commissioning, you're winning a tender. The technology and the supplies have to be available to deploy, whether it's solar or wind or whatever. And equally, the labor force has to be ready. So I see this as a materials, a manpower, and a money challenge. And all three have to work in sync, which therefore brings me to your point about what kind of roadmap. Therefore, I think I've kind of given you a hint of the answer. The roadmap should be not just about setting the target and the direction of travel, but demonstrating sector by sector, how do we overcome the materials, the money, and the manpower challenge? Because otherwise, what will happen is the money bags will say, hey, but the materials are not available. The materials folks will say, hey, but the manpower isn't available. And it becomes a chicken and egg problem. And each one says, each vendor says they are interested in the growth story that's driven by green growth, but only if something else happens. So this synchronization has to be the one-word mantra for the roadmaps for green growth.
So, Arunabha, then how do we overcome this cost curve? And what is the sort of collaboration that you think we will need?
I think what is needed is for different types of stakeholders to be brought together. I'll give you a concrete example of about a decade ago. One of the challenges that we had was that as the renewables targets were getting ramped up, the worry was that we don't have enough, say, transmission lines to carry those renewables. So this policy was introduced then to what were called green energy corridors. Because in the absence of that, what might have happened was that we could be building our renewable energy plants in one part of the country, but maybe the grid players and the grid expanding entities would have been building on the grid somewhere else. Both are doing good work, but it's not synchronized. So it's very important to understand that aspect. But there's also a dynamic nature of this. Again, a decade ago, it used to take anywhere upwards of 2 years, 24 months, to put a large-scale renewables project together. Now, because of efficiencies, the economies of scale, learning by doing, that time scale has been reduced to about 18 months. So you can get renewables projects deployed very quickly, but can you get grid deployed as quickly enough? Same thing will apply to, say, electric mobility. If I can create a lot of jobs in manufacturing electric vehicles, am I equally mapping out, what are the main transport and mobility hubs and routes so that I can prioritize the charging infrastructure simultaneously, right? So this is really how this kind of very data-driven coordination will be needed between these different players for the chicken and egg not to become the excuse for not acting.
All right. Are there any lessons that India can actually imbibe from other economies, so that we can tide over some of the problems, maybe like technology or skilling challenges, when it comes to deploying clean tech?
The most important lesson is to elevate the green growth story to a strategic green growth story. What do I mean by this? In 2012, when China came out with its 12th five-year plan, it already was building hundreds of gigawatts of coal-based capacity. In fact, it has 1,000 gigawatts of coal. So while it was building dirty energy infrastructure, its plan was very clear that what will drive the growth of the future. And so they had this concept called strategic new industries. So old industries like steel, etc., are strategic in any case, steel, cement, and so forth. So what are the strategic new industries? And then they said, which are the industries in which our technology level and the world leader, that gap is the least. Means we have a potential to cover that gap. Using this kind of methodology, they came out with 7 strategic new industries, many of which were related to new energy, alternative mobility, battery storage, and so on and so forth. A few years later, they came out with a strategic technology plan, basically saying that by 2025, all major technology, all high tech, we will stop importing. Means we will build up that domestic scientific and technical capability. Now, I'm not saying we have to, march alongside China. It is a different economy, different economic structure. But that focus on what is strategic elevated something that could have been just a tree hugger agenda to something where hundreds of billions of dollars of public and private capital could flow. So that is the most important thing. And I see encouraging science towards that in India, whether it's the solar mission or now the green hydrogen mission and so forth. But I think that we've got to make sure that these are not just announcements, but every element within and outside government focused on these understands the strategic nature of this. Take green hydrogen. If currently on paper, the Indian green hydrogen mission is the world's largest, 5 million tons of production by 2030 is the target. But if we don't get our act together, then nearly 40% of electrolyzers will be manufactured by China by 2030. So, we will go from importing 80% of oil to importing 80% of solar panels and 40% of electrolyzers. That is not energy security. Now, how do you give that strategic dimension to it? The other thing that has to happen related to this is how do we create a lot more of the demand offtake? Often what happens with the green transition is that the focus is on the supply side. How much more gigawatts of renewables can I build? How many more million tons of green hydrogen I can produce and so forth. But what about the demand side? Are consumers interested in EVs? Are consumers or utilities interested in buying renewables? Are industries interested in buying green hydrogen to make green steel? A lot more focus has to be given on the demand side. That's where, say, the Inflation Reduction Act of the US, that is providing $369 billion in federal subsidies, a lot of it is focused on creating that demand pull. We at CW have estimated, for instance, states that provide support for end consumer financing for EVs have a 2x increase in sales compared to states that don't. So even within India, let alone outside India, you can actually map out which states are doing a great job at promoting battery manufacturing, which states are doing a great job in promoting EV sales, which states are doing a great job in nudging industries towards moving to alternative fuels and so forth. Once you do that mapping, you can then see how both the demand side, the strategic focus on industries, but also, on the supply side, and on the demand side, how do I support the off-takers, whether it's an individual household or a large industry or a power utility? How can I get them to demand these products at scale, which gives you the economy of scale to drive down costs and build the market?
Right. So basically, we need a balance on both sides. And you also mentioned the kind of work that CEEW is doing. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What's the sort of impact that it is seeing, in pushing India towards a path of sustainability?
Well, CEW's mission statement is we will use data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. Basically, to put it in more simple words, we like to create markets where they don't exist, and drive in billions of dollars of investment and create millions of jobs. We see the green growth paradigm as a major driver of India's development, but also as a lesson for the world. So, we were set up the same year as the National Solar Mission started in India. So we've been evaluating that from day one, and therefore have had an intimate role in evaluating how the mission is progressing, but also advising on how to ramp up the targets and where are the bottlenecks and how to free them up. We were intimately involved in conceptualizing and designing the International Solar Alliance, which now has 113 signatory countries, the first international organization that India has hosted. We were intimately involved in modeling the HFC, the refrigerant-related emissions from our cooling systems, and India was a party to the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, and after which we co-authored the India Cooling Action Plan, the first country in the world to come out with a cooling action plan. We've been involved in looking at, more recently, the green hydrogen mission. I co-chaired the energy track for the science, technology, innovation policy for India, and green hydrogen was a major push that we identified. But equally, we're looking at advanced cell chemistry, we're looking at renewable energy supply chains. We did the first framework of critical minerals for India's industrial development. And now, with our G20 presidency, many of these themes around energy security, around sustainability, around economic development that is also sustainable, around creating jobs, around sustainable, not just production, but sustainable consumption, the life mission that the Prime Minister inaugurated a few months ago, are all being showcased through India's G20 presidency, and CW is supporting about 11 ministries for this. So in doing all of that, I told you about the huge job potential that gets created. But this decade alone, India will offer a market or an investment opportunity of about $550 billion in renewables, in mobility, and in green hydrogen. So the jobs, the growth, and the sustainability dimensions of our overall development trajectory, we see at CW not as either or, but as the endpoints of a triangle or a trinity that drives India's future growth.
All right. You mentioned this kind of triaging of the three things coming together: the tech, the sustainability, and the jobs bit. But for our audience, and this is my last question to you, when you see the overlap, what do you see as the most in-demand jobs in the future? Will they all be linked to sustainability? And of course, they'll all have underpinnings of tech.
It's hard to identify an individual sector, but I will identify two pillars. I've talked a lot about decarbonization, but there is another revolution in India that's underway, that's digitalization. And I see these two pillars being the foundations for India's growth. The decarbonization story will drive renewables, green hydrogen, industrial growth, and so forth. The digitalization story will enable the synchronization of these different industries with the consumer, with financial markets, and create the opportunity to create new business models. Let me give you an example. Today, we are not buying an electric vehicle because we don't know where to charge it. Today, we are not deploying a solar panel because we don't know what do I do when the sun does not shine. Today, I'm losing food production because I don't have the cold chains to preserve the agriculture produce. Today, my roads are congested because I don't have enough public transport on the roads. Now, let's imagine a very different future, that I have rooftop solar, which creates 8 times more jobs than utility scale solar, which creates more jobs than coal or natural gas. Now I have rooftop solar, I have electric vehicle charging, I have district heating and cooling, which allows me to do cold chains, and I have electric public transport. India did the largest tender of e-buses last year. To coordinate all of that, I forgot to mention, India is also deploying several 100 million smart meters. Now, the digital revolution will help the alignment of all these different individual sectoral plays and say, okay, how does solar power generation one time help me to charge electric vehicles at another time, which then become my battery banks for a third thing, which then allow me to do the cold chain. But to create the market for that, I use the digital interface. I don't sign long-term power purchase agreements, but I use a digital interface where the bytes are coordinating the electrons and the molecules that drive, that fuel any economy. And once you do that, the bits and the bytes, the molecules and the electrons, then the money begins to flow through very innovative business models. What does that mean in terms of skill sets? Completely new sets of skill sets in terms of not just engineering, but business model innovation of treating consumers not just as consumers, but as prosumers or producers and consumers of new products and services, and creating new circular economy for material management and critical minerals. These will be all new areas of skills that have to be developed, and we should not be trying to over-determine, what a single career would look like. It's better to think about the basic transformations that will happen in the economy and then align one's skill sets in a way that you can support those transformations.
All right, that's great advice. And you really laid it out for us, the decarbonization bit and the digitalization bit. And of course, with BharatNet and 5G, we powered ahead on the digitalization bit. But Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, CEO, Council on Energy, Environment and Water, thank you so very much for being part of ET Future of Jobs Summit. It's been a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you, Melanie, and all the best for your summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to this panel discussion on day 2 of ET Future of Jobs Summit. I'm Melanie Bhatt. We just heard Dr. Arunabha Ghosh on why sustainability and tech will be the key to future jobs. We'll now aim to get a sense of the rise of green-collar jobs, the trends, the opportunities, and challenges as businesses pursue sustainable growth. And I'm very happy to have with me Dr. Miniya Chatterji, founder and CEO, Sustain Labs Paris. Miniya, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we have with us Satyam Vyas. He's the founder and CEO, Arthan and Climate Asia. Satyam, very good to have you here with us.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right. In the budget this year, green growth was one of the top priorities. The government announced many schemes to fuel this green growth. In this backdrop, how optimistic are you about India's green future? And are there any specific initiatives that stand out for you? Miniya, if you could start.
Sure. It's definitely a step forward, and green growth and youth power are two of the 7 priority focuses of the Union Budget 2023. And specifically capital for energy transition through gap funding, as well as promotion of circular economy initiatives under the Govardhan scheme is definitely going to be, can be tapped tapped for and through climate education for youth. So that's definitely a step forward. But I think there's a lot more in terms of the how and the implementation, which needs to be worked out. And there, who's going to take the lead, and what's the stakeholder ecosystem that's going to work together? Those are the things which I think really needs to be worked out.
So you're saying, broadly, we seem to have the priorities right, but the roadmap needs to be sorted out. Satyam, your views?
I agree with Miniya, and I think I would like to add that the government is definitely showing the right intent by allocating 35,000 crores. So that's a significant step forward. I'm very happy to see that. I'm also seeing a lot of citizen-centric approaches, because one of the key pillars is to support 1 crore farmers over the period of next 3 years through the National Mission on Natural Farming. So it's putting the agenda of the farmers up front and center. So that's positive. And with the National Green Hydrogen Mission, a significant capital allocation for that is fairly progressive, keeping in mind the future of hydrogen for across the world. So, but like Miniya said, I think the most important part is who's going to do what, who will remain accountable for what, because in every budget we see significant announcements. The key thing would be the accountability at the end of the year to see where we have made progress and where we haven't.
All right. You guys want to take a shot on setting out what the roadmap should be like? Satyam, if you want to begin.
I think, I mean, clearly demarcating which ministry is responsible for which particular element and where we are seeing a lot of intersectionality. So if you look at across the 6-7 themes mentioned, it cuts across many ministries, right? So I mean, for a person like me, the first thing I would like to know is which ministry is responsible for what kind of outcome, and if we have to hold them accountable, who are the key people responsible for this? We have a clear indication of the national green hydrogen, so I think we can track that down over the period of time. But that same element is missing across various initiatives listed out.
All right, Miniya?
Yeah, so spot on. I think, like Satyam said, that within the ministries and the administrative services, which departments would be doing what. But I'm also a big believer in the private sector. I mean, that's why I work a lot through the private sector, leveraging that. And there, I feel that that needs to be tapped in a better way. So far, it's always for CSR funds or whatever. But then there is a lot of R&D and know-how and actual willingness, and cutting through the noise and looking at which are the small and big companies and corporations and thought leaders within the organizations, R&D facilities who are making headway, and combining that with government as well as civil society. I think that kind of a task force. If you remember, for COVID also, that kind of task force had come forward, and similarly, that needs to come together. So that I think that will be the first step of bringing in the right institutions and people. But again, it shouldn't become a talk shop, because then that can just continue this way, councils and meetings and stuff. So a very concrete plan needs to be put together. And what I'm seeing the biggest problems for implementation, because I work mostly on like implementation, strategy and implementation, is number one, the funds, because a lot of this means transformatory work, moving from fossil fuels to renewable, but across plastics to renewable, to recycled plastics and so on. So very transformatory work. So where is the funding going to come from? So there, I think climate finance needs to step in. We need to move away just from public finance and have structured finance products catering to this blended finance coming into this. Finance is one. The second piece is the skills, because we work with 200 companies just in India, and there again, the bottom, at the end of the day, who's going to do the work? So just climate education to be, scaled up more. And the third piece is incentive. So, there is regulations, but also thinking beyond regulations as well, some smart ways of, incentivizing the right stakeholders to take the right steps.
All right, so there are a lot of moving pieces, and we essentially need to put them all into place. The vision is there, but more needs to be done in terms of execution. Miniya, to continue with you, Sustain Labs establishes and manages new institutes and assets that comprehensively moves the needle towards a sustainable future. Talk to us about some of the solutions that you offer, including sustainable infrastructure and organizational transformation. And what's the sort of impact, it's having in making organizations more environmentally friendly?
Sure. So we're looking at systemic issues, where if I put in my time, I can make like a large impact by that. So we kind of stay away from projects and short-term things, but then look at building institutions which has a snowballing effect then. So to give an example, as I think most of us know, India's first climate school in India. So that's a BTech, an undergrad engineering degree to a PhD degree school, which I'm so happy about. A lot of sweat and sleep goes into putting that together. Another is in Asia Pacific. We worked on in Fiji in large scale affordable housing development, which was completely environmentally and socially responsible. We worked with the World Bank on that. In UAE, we are working very closely with the Dubai government to setting up a new institution for the net zero transition of the private sector in the MEASA region, Middle East, Africa, and South Asia region. Again, in the UAE, in the education sector, again, as you can see, I'm quite passionate about that. The education sector, we're working on it with the environment as well as the education ministries, looking at extracurricular activities across schools and universities, across UAE. So these are some examples of building institutions and setting up, new systems. We also rank India's largest 200 companies on their sustainability, which is amazing because it's an asset that we've created every year, 3 years, and companies want to move from 25 to 12 and to 1 or whatever. So these are some examples, and where it's an idea. It's implementing that idea in a way that can then have a large impact beyond me.
All right. You spoke of the reports, the ESG reports. Do you see attitudes shifting on the ground? Maybe from government stakeholders, private sector, public sector stakeholders on the focus that organizations need to place when it comes to environmental issues?
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. So we have the advantage of having a time series because we've been ranking companies for the last 3 years. So between last year to this year, we saw a 64% jump in reporting as per the GRI or the integrated reporting framework. But this is, of course, for India's largest 200 companies. For smaller companies, we're the implementation partner of We Mean Business, the international organization which works with SMEs. There, the traction is quite slow, because small companies, they just don't have the bandwidth to do much. So that's something that we try to work with large companies to work their supply chain. So that's one piece. I think let's just stepping back to move forward with having companies know their data, know where the data lies, and publicly being accountable with the data. I think we need to teach companies to do this, and that's in my own small way we try to do it. Like if a company comes to us saying that can you write our sustainability report, we actually say no, you can go elsewhere. But we'll teach you how to do it. We'll build capacity and we'll teach you how to do it. We'll hand over the first year, but you do it the next year. So I think that's what's needed more. And that's where I think some of the consulting companies and all that need to do a, check on themselves that, that not to make it into a money-making thing, but to actually help build capacity within companies, small and big, to teach them how to do it themselves. But I would also just add one last thing, that it's also about, because there's so many different frameworks available and none of them is official. So some of them are gaining more traction than the others, like GRI integrated reporting. So there's also reporting fatigue, which is setting in some of the companies who are reporting. And then there's also this big question that how much is enough? And should the focus be really on so much on disclosures and reporting? And does that pull an organization away from doing what is needed? And can large companies just afford to do this? And what about the smaller ones? Because these reporting and all of this is TCFD and all these frameworks is quite time consuming and resource consuming.
All right. Satyam, do you have a view on that?
I don't have a view on this. I agree with what Miniya has said. And I'm glad that the work she's been doing, and especially around ranking the industries which I've been following. And I think Miniya is a pioneer in this space to add the sustainability lens. Even when no one else was talking about sustainability, I would like to add that. So congratulations, Miniya, for being on the forefront of this work right from the beginning.
Right. Satyam, you spoke about net zero, and we want to reach net zero by 2070. But in 2021, over 80%, 89% say some data. Overall, 89% of India's energy needs were being met through fossil fuels. We're also going to be among the most populous country in the world. There's also a rapidly growing middle class, and we are hurtling when it comes to urbanization. Given all of these things, our demand for energy will only increase. So first of all, do you think it'll be possible for us to be net zero by 2070? And again, What is the sort of roadmap that we need to have in place?
Thank you. Great question and an incredibly difficult one. So I would say that, like I started at the beginning, I think we have our aspirations at place. Intent is there. We want to achieve net zero by 2030 and ensure we meet 50% of our electricity requirement from renewable energy source by 2030. And it's very, very ambitious. But it seems like we are heading in the right way because India is definitely doing the groundwork around emerging technologies such as hydrogen, such as battery storage, low carbon steel, cement, fertilizers. And I think with this advancement, along with policy support, private sector, civil society organizations coming together, clearly solar can become less expensive than the coal-fired ones. But if you ask me, time will tell. These are all assumptions, and these are the data points we are working with. But clearly, Indian market is up for renewable electrification. And as far as the number goes, by 2026, we are expected to double down renewable energy in India. We are also the world's largest producer for modern bioenergy, which is incredible. But when it comes to the penetration of renewable energy, again, like everything else in this country, there are certain states which are at the forefront and the certain states that are lacking behind. So I think for a country like as diverse as India, one needs to really push for a national policy that really ensures that the penetration happens universally across all the states, because the key performing states in India, which are rich renewable wise, are significantly higher than the national average, which I think stands somewhere around 8%, 8.2%. So keeping all of this in mind, for us to really become a leader in this space, we need a push and a pull. I mean, policy is in place, policy documents are in place, the intent is there, the budget outlay is there, but we need work across the sector, between the private sector, between the government, between the civil society, to become a sort of a leader in the future. And it is a big industry, so there is a market opportunity that India needs to capture. I think some $80 billion by 2030, if I just look at transition to clean energy. But for that $80 billion, a lot of investment is also required. So where that investment is going to come from in a larger scheme of things is also critical. The outlay that we are talking about is nothing when it comes to meeting our energy goals long term.
No, so Miniya, the union budget provided some 35,000 crore for priority capital investment towards energy transition. Do you are saying, Satyam, that that's not enough?
I'm saying that's not enough when you actually start looking at the kind of investment. I think there is a report by the International Energy Agency, IEA, which particularly talks about we need $160 billion per year. That's 3 times the investment, current investment, and which requires, again, low cost, long-term patient capital, which we are far away from that currently.
All right. Miniya, by 2030, India has set a target of meeting 50% of its electricity needs through renewable. First of all, what do you think of the target? Can we meet it?
So, if we come together, like what Satyam also said, if we actually come together, yes, then things can be done. Of course, like I said, where will the money come from and all of that, and these technologies as well, how will, somebody needs to be putting that together. So the know-how and the funding needs to come in place, and the incentive and the push, again, those 3 factors that I talked about. But the other piece is that even if we do make it by 2030, everything works out like what we're saying and it does, I think the social piece should not be left behind. Because what are the people going to do who are skilled in other, in the fossil fuel industry or whatever, like even for plastics, in the plastic. So I think in India, it's a very different scenario than in Europe and some of the other places, UAE, for example, where we work in, and where we have to tread very sensitively. So the transition at the government level to the 2030 goal of the energy transition, or the 2070, needs to have a plan, a slow plan for the transition, keeping in mind livelihood and people, because empty stomach cannot be thinking about the planet. And also, there are 11 to 18 million kids who are on the street, who also deserve an equal amount of attention. And just because it is not on the global map doesn't mean that, they be deprived of that focus as well.
Right. So, transitioning to green jobs. So people need to be skilled to transition. And of course, you're saying that, all of this needs to be sustainable, but also inclusive. Take everyone along and no one gets left behind.
And if I may, there are some very nice case studies where people have been upskilled, instead of being laid off. And I think that's a topical thing to think about, like given all the IT layoffs and all of that and how that impacts people's lives. So, upskilling has happened in the transition to being sustainable. So maybe that's something but it needs a plan.
All right. Both of you, I think, have mentioned the National Green Hydrogen Mission. It's something that India is focusing very heavily on, right? Like even in this budget, there was a lot of thrust on it. But how optimistic are you both that, hydrogen will be this fuel of the future? And, what do these current investments in hydrogen mean for, say, energy independence and India becoming the global hub that it wants to be? Miniya?
Okay. So I'm actually very optimistic about these. I call them transition economy technologies. So, hydrogen and then carbon capture and all of that. So for hydrogen, yes, I think there is it's a very clear focus that India has on hydrogen. Of course, we all know that it's expensive. And so and there are new technologies which are coming up to tracking that, right? Or looking at the affordability as well as the scalability of hydrogen as a fuel. And then it comes to the adaptation of it as well. Like how can your, companies who need to adapt to hydrogen can change their systems to actually move to hydrogen as a fuel. But I'm fairly optimistic, and I think that's the way to go. I mean, that's why even the university that I've established, it's focusing on technology, because this is the future. We need to have technological interventions.
All right. Satyam?
Yeah, I agree with Miniya, and I think she also touched upon the infrastructure cost side of it, which the government is again putting in money. But the transition to hydrogen economy is definitely going to reduce India's import dependency on hydrocarbon fuels and also provide clean air to the citizen, which will thus reduce the greenhouse gas emission. So it is, for all practical purposes, it makes complete sense. But I guess the key thing for us to figure out is what goes in the production of that hydrogen. Because if the hydrogen is produced using fossil fuel, then it will again end up releasing significant greenhouse gas. So I think if the hydrogen is produced using low cost, low carbon production methods, such as renewable energy, it's a win-win. So it's a classic story of catch-22 is, yes, hydrogen is great, but where is the hydrogen coming from, and what are the sources of electricity for hydrogen? And for India, I think long term, if this works out, we are historically have been dependent on imports. We can reverse that. So it's going to happen. How fast it will happen, how slowly it will happen, only time will tell. But if it happens as we are predicting by 2030, the renewable energy of 50% goes, then it's going to benefit everyone. It's going to benefit the society, it's going to benefit the private sector, it's going to benefit the government.
And Climate Asia addresses the issue of human capital in the space of, renewables and all of this. What are your projections when it comes to the number of jobs that you think could be created with the green economy? And, what are the kinds of jobs that you see being created? Something that we touched upon a little while.
Great question. I think let's begin at a very macro level, which is where an ILO comes in and predicts 24 million green jobs by 2030. What we are increasingly seeing is the use of the word sustainability in every job, which is more about greening an existing job rather than a new green job. A recent study by two professors from Yale and Arizona University predicted that they saw a tenfold increase in the word sustainability in the job description in the last decade. So which is clearly a trend that is going to increase further and further. LinkedIn analysis of 800 million users predicted that the green jobs have been growing 8% year on year. But if you comes to a data from India, we don't have a data which talks about the green job growth. We have a very macro level indicator where we say, okay, few million jobs definitely are getting created over the period of time. That few can be few 100 million if you get into every job is a climate job, because there are two sides of the definition. One is what are technical climate jobs, which will never be in volume, and what are jobs that need to get greener and greener to live our life, which is climate friendly long term. We launched our Climate Asia platform sometime mid last year, and few thousand jobs have been posted on our platform in the last, I would say, less than 6 months. Now, this is just day zero for us to predict any kind of trend, but we are anticipating, we are looking at few million jobs easily in a country like India, which will still be like a very white collar, not getting into blue and gray collar and solar and microgrids, because that will create a lot more direct employment opportunities, but also requires, Miniya mentioned, I think reskilling, upskilling is a very critical puzzle of this entire workforce, because it's not like getting new people, it's like getting existing people to get trained on climate.
Right. Who do you think will benefit most out of this summit? Which section of the working population?
I mean, everyone can benefit. I think this is one of those trends where if you go back in time and say technology.com boom, who's going to benefit? Everyone who picked up like a Microsoft Excel as a skill benefited in the white collar economy. Similarly with climate, I think everyone who will start understanding that this industry is transforming and transforming at a very high pace. Like data from sustainable fashion predicts like 90% growth rate between 2016 and 2020 in just sustainable fashion. Now, so textile industry is going to benefit out of it. Everything you buy talks about sustainable right now, and where it's being produced, where it's coming from, what kind of cotton it is, how much water is being used, why you should recycle. Similarly, I think the rapid expansion in ESG, Minia would be a better person to talk more about data, but I think it's going from a transition of just being a compliance issue to now being embedded in the core of the business model, which would require very, very many professionals. So I think the fastest growing green jobs, at least what we analyze in the last 5 years, has been, we are seeing terms like sustainability managers, solar consultants, compliance managers, environment, health and safety specialists. These are fastest growing jobs globally. But in India, there's a lot of intersectionality at play too, because we don't have defined work streams like that. I would actually ask Miniya to jump in right now, especially on the ESG front. Miniya, if you want to add, because you would know more about the.
Oh, yeah, is it okay? I've been itching to also add to that renewable energy piece, because I agree with Satyam, but I would like to add that it's not enough at all. So when we track companies and looking at their source of power, and if I would just have the lens of which are the industries. So industries is the biggest lever of change, looking at on a positive note, lever of change for climate action, right? So within industries, it is the power sector, ONG, which is part of it, or if you even look at it separately, and manufacturing. And within manufacturing, it is sectors like cement. So, if you look at these sectors even, then the shift that has been made to renewables is very slow. And then, there are some sectors which are very interesting, like cement or even IT, where there are some champions, there are some, I won't take names here, I work with almost all of them, but then, there are some companies which have embedded circularity completely within their business models, who have made headway of almost 40%. In the IT sector, there is in the top 200, 40% renewables. At the same time, there is a leading company within IT who is struggling to just meet 9%. Similarly, in cement, like I said, there is complete circularity, but then there are also companies which are like cement is one of the most polluting companies. So it's just a very interesting phase. And I think my second book really should be on this, because there is this, number one, it's very, very slow. Still, if you actually look at action, whether, rubber hits the road, then very slow in terms of industry transformation, transition to renewable energy. Second, in the same sector, especially the highly polluting ones, there are some champions and there are some laggards. So what is, these laggards have role models and they can actually, move towards being champions. So this is my first, piece. The other on ESG, I think, there is a shift from compliance and taking the checkbox, especially when, I entered sustainability fields long ago. I mean, like Satyam was saying, not many people have been talking about it and all of that. That time it was a nice to have. It was a nice to have, so, okay, this is nice. So now it's important. And there is regulatory pressure, there is market peer pressure on large companies, but there's not so much consumer pressure yet. That's in very niche products, there is consumer pressure. So, and then some of the other roadblocks is, some of the things that we talk about technologies. I think we need a big technology play, but then also things like carbon credits and all of that. The truth is that it's actually very expensive, these routes, even carbon credits, it's very complex. And again, there are consultants who are, kind of coming in as intermediaries and things like that. But then for farmers to benefit, for example, to know how to get carbon credits, and there are certain institutions which are allowed to give these carbon credits, and then how to get it done, it's very, very complex. So the whole move to ESG, I think it looks good on paper and the budget and all of that. But I work on the implementation of it, and
which are some of the sectors which provide some of the biggest business opportunities, and what are you optimistic about?
So some of the turnaround stories that we are seeing in sectors, like I said, cement is tremendous. I mean, that's a fantastic sector where you are seeing complete circularity. IT industry, by default, it's just because they're not manufacturing, so they tend to be they are making headway. And for example, Tech Mahindra, they perform very well. They've also started a sustainability consulting business, for example. So, so the IT, I think, sector is leading in that sense, but that's because of the nature of business that they are in. In manufacturing, there is a lot of circularity at play, which can be tapped upon. But certain sectors, certain industries where circularity is key, like for example, fashion, where literally sustainable fashion means circularity, and 9% of the global carbon footprint comes from the fashion industry. So there, I think, there's a long way to go, if I may call a spade a spade, So there is a lot of we are part of this association, and Ellen MacArthur, whatever, and all of that. But there's nothing happening. And in India, also sustainable fashion, it's all about the social side. And you know how passionate I am, interested in the social side, but it's about giving livelihood to the local, the craftsmen. But on the environmental side, there's a lot of lip service there that's happening in the mainstream large retail stores, which can really, that's where, you can make a lot of headway there of introducing circularity. But the greatest action needs to come from the power sector. And that's where my greatest frustration is also. If you look at the numbers, look at their energy mix, renewables is so slim, and a lot of them are private sectors. And some companies, they sold off their power business and it's just sold off to someone else, it's just not sitting on their books. So, so all this, so I think the power sector needs to really make a lot of headway.
Yeah, the turnaround stories. But I think what I'm also hearing a lot of from the both of you is that the broad agenda seems to be in place, but the nitty-gritties are missing. And, we need to have these collaborations if it comes from the private sector, the public sector, the government, and people. And also, I think creating the sort of awareness that is required about green jobs, about sustainability. I think that also is one of the, missing pieces.
Formal structure, there's been no formal education on climate-related skills, sustainability or on climate. And environment and climate are two different things. So environment is a subset of climate. So at best, you have universities with environmental studies, but climate, and that's the one distinction. So there you have very few people who are in the industry who are trained in climate. And I'm a big believer in technology play. So where are the people who know how to do this stuff? So that's really the biggest problem right now facing industry, who knows how to do this. So that's one. The second piece is the willingness across a few, in India, most companies are hierarchies, right? So the willingness across a few levels of the hierarchy. So sometimes what I'm practically seeing is the vision is there at the top, but then somewhere in the mid-management, that vision is not shared, and that's just translated into what we today call greenwashing. So having that kind of a percolation of the vision, sometimes it might be from the CSO who's at the second level to the top, convincing the top, but that vision and that action plan needs to be across a few levels in an organization, which is not happening. Second thing, right? The third piece, which is also related to skills, climate skills, is that consumers need to have some basic knowledge about climate data and skills. Because, because something that they pick up an object and they should be able to understand when it's written that, this is my tons of CO2 equivalent, that amount that is written. And, they should be able to question, be very skeptical that, how do they get to this? Things like that. So some basic skills, because then that's going to also encourage companies to be more sustainable, and also it's going to combat some of the superfluous, the fluffy, I call it, the sustainability that's going on, because it's going to make it just more tangible in the right direction. So these are the three skills related things that I think are the biggest challenges that companies are facing related to the transition.
All right, Satyam, your point to now, how are we going to attempt to even address all of these issues, and what are the ways in which we could possibly fix them?
Wish I could answer this in like simpler manner, but I guess these are macro perspectives, but Miniya has covered them already, but I would just re-emphasize some of them. One is inclusion of green competencies in existing jobs, which I think is very, very critical. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to bring a green perspective in the wheel, which means a job description needs to have a green in it and a focus on that. And thus the workforce will start thinking about it. The second is skilling is a big, big thing. Again, Miniya touched upon upskilling, reskilling right at the beginning. And I think especially when we are talking about hydrogen, batteries, all of that will require massive upskilling. So I think ITIs are going to play a very, very prominent role. But if you go back in time and look at the skill mission, there have been challenges and there are still challenges, and making it climate centric will be even more complicated. So thus we need to make these ITIs connected to the industries and make it more mainstream versus, and how skilling is perceived in this country. When you're not able to get into a regular degree program, thus you get into skilling. I think it needs to switch completely if you have to really look at a green, larger workforce. I would also touch upon, I think it's very critical to look at the rural workforce from an inclusion lens, because while we are talking about all these solar and EVs and wind, whatever it is, I mean, to Miniya's point, yes, we are not there yet when it comes to cement and steel, and it might take us another couple of decades to even reach a green steel and green cement level, because it's infrastructure heavy and investment heavy. But one has to keep in mind the rural population and design skill development programs around them, because my fear is we should not miss out on skilling the workforce, especially the workforce at the bottom of the pyramid, and just get into a white collar, climate centric world, which we are just dealing with. What in India, workforce and 150 million people working in white collar economy, it's not worth it. I mean, we have to start looking at a country holistically. So like rooftops, solar panels, microgrids are going to create a lot of direct jobs. Women in energy, I think we did not touch upon that. Less than 5% in a country like India from a female workforce participation. Huge uphill task to actually look at it, not just from a lens of skill. I think it's also a lens of social constructs, right? Where are these microgrids in rural Rajasthan? Why a woman is not able to go and work in rural Rajasthan will be less to do with skills, more to do with the social construct. So I think we are looking at a transformation of a society at scale. While we have these very, very great budget speeches and incredible allocation of funds, it will still boil down to that one beneficiary in an urban area and a one beneficiary in a rural area, and how their life revolves around climate. And we need to keep everyone at the heart of it, because I think while we have these conversations, I've noticed, decarbonization of steel has become a topic everyone is talking about. Like Miniya said, they are champions. And beyond those few champions, no one else is talking about green steel because it's investment heavy. So we need to start thinking of entire industry and not the outliers, because as a country, we are very happy with the outliers. And all of us know who these outliers are. I mean, they have been performing well in the past decade, and they will continue to perform well even in the future.
All right. Satyam, those are very strong points for us to end this discussion. Miniya and Satyam, thank you so very much, for your time and for also shining the lens on, where these green collared jobs are coming from, what are the trends that we are seeing, the opportunities, but most of all, the challenges that exist in ensuring that we are sustainable, but we are also inclusive. Thank you so very much for your thoughts and for your time today.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so much for having us over. Thank you. Take care.
Hello and welcome to this special fireside at the ET Future of Jobs Summit. I'm Meloni Bhatt, and I'm very happy to have with me Arpit Sharma, Chief Operating Officer of Skill Council for Green Jobs. This council is aligned to the National Skill Development Mission of the government, created by the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, and the council is promoted by the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Arpit has been with the council since its inception in 2015. Arpit, thank you very much for your time here today.
It is my pleasure and my honor, Meloni, to be here at this interview. Thank you so much. Thanks to you.
Thank you very much. We're very glad to have you. According to a report by the World Economic Forum, India's transition to net zero could create some 50 million jobs and contribute $1 trillion to the economy, all by 2030. In the light of that, can you tell us a little bit first of the Skill Council for Green Jobs, and where does India stand when it comes to opportunities of green jobs, and what is the potential that you see in terms of sectors, say for instance solar, wind, EV, and hydro of the green economy that have the most opportunities in terms of job creation?
Okay. So thank you, Meloni. First of all, I would like to tell you a little bit more about the Skill Council for Green Jobs. Actually, Skill Council for Green Jobs has been created by, as you rightly mentioned, by Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. And we are working very closely in the domain of capacity building for green businesses and cutting edge climate friendly technologies. So since Skill Council for Green Jobs was incorporated as a society in October 2015, and which is being managed by the industry-led governing council. And Skill Council for Green Job our scope also covers the entire gamut of green businesses, renewable energy, sustainable development, green construction, green transportation, green hydrogen, solid waste management, wastewater management, e-waste management, and hence we would have pan-India impact. Yeah. I would also like to tell you that Skill Council for Green Jobs recently has been awarded as has been given a status of awarding body by National Council for Vocational Education and Training, which is NCVET, and we were. I'm proud to say that we have been one of the first organizations to be given the status of an awarding body.
All right, you have a very large mandate, Arpit. When we look at green jobs, the green economy, can you throw light on India's status currently, and what are the sort of opportunities that you see when it comes to green jobs? The sectors, for instance, which you see as having the most opportunities in terms of job creation?
Okay, so Meloni, I would like to tell you that, of course, India, if I go back a little bit, then, we as a country, we have a huge target of around 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity to be achieved by 2030. And India as a country is also aiming to have 450 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. So, of course, it gives a lot of opportunity in terms of job creation, in terms of sustainable development, in terms of electrification, in terms of power generation. So this gives a lot of thrust on solar sector, especially because we have seen that the solar deployment in the last 4 years has been enormous in the country. And of course, in renewable energy, there is a lot of potential in the solar PV and solar thermal. Then we have wind energy, then we have hydro energy, we have energy storage, we have sectors like biomass, cogen, waste to energy. There's a lot of potential in the rural market for clean cook stoves. And the second vertical, I would say that, there is environment, forest, and climate change, which has subsectors under that, which is solid waste management, which is solid waste management also has, again, subsectors, which has municipal waste management and agriculture and animal husbandry. Then we have water management, we have e-waste management, we have carbon sinks, we have green buildings, green constructions, green transportations, green hydrogen, which is the buzzword in the world, and we have then energy storage. So these are not the few, but these are the many areas that a Skill Council for Green Jobs has a mandate in terms of not only create jobs, but first to create the content, first to do a skill gap analysis, then to identify the job roles, then finally to develop the curriculum, course curriculum, affiliate suitable training partners who can deliver the trainings, and have suitable assessment bodies who can do the assessment and certification of the candidates, and finally make the candidates employable for the industry. So these are so many sectors that we are actually covering, out of which I think we have reached to about 60% of these sectors. We have already developed the qualifications and developed the curriculums, and the trainings have been rolled out.
So what's the progress in terms of creating green jobs? How many jobs have been created?
Okay, so from 2015 till date, Green Jobs has certified more than 6 lakh candidates in the country, which includes solar, which includes clean cook stoves. There have been trainings which have been done in wind energy. There have been trainings which have been done in waste management. I think more than 2 lakh trainings of sanitation workers of various municipal corporations on mechanized cleanings, on health and safety have been done. And we have trained more than 1.5 million candidates in solar PV domain. And solar PV domain, we have again various job roles, like we have a Surya Mitra, who is an installer who does the electrical work as well as the civil work. Then we have a designer, we have a solar helper, we have a solar entrepreneur. We also have someone who is called a solar proposal evaluation specialist, who knows how to finance a solar proposal. So in solar only, we have around 20 job roles, and a lot of trainings have been imparted under these job roles.
All right. When it comes to reskilling, how are you managing that so that workers can make the transition into this new sector? And, how are your partnerships working out with the private sector in this regard?
Of course. So when we talk about reskilling, one of the most important things which comes to everyone's mind is just transition. So there is a lot of phasing down of coal plants, and there's also the entire industry, whether it is the steel industry or the coal industry or any industry which uses a lot of electricity. They are going on. They have an aim to go on the green hydrogen to be used as fuel in the future by 2030 in India. So there is a lot of potential of reskilling and upskilling these particular individuals who are working in these sectors into the sector of solar PV as well as green hydrogen and wind sector.
This is interesting. But we have this target of net zero emissions by 2070, right? Currently, though, nearly about 89% of the country's energy needs in 2021 were being met by fossil fuels. Now, this is as per the BP Statistical Review of World Energy published in June 2022. Now, given the size of our population, which is also aspirational, the rapid urbanization, our energy demand will only zoom. So what do you think of our target of reaching net zero by 2070? Is it achievable? And then what's the roadmap? If we want to achieve it, what are the challenges and hurdles that we might possibly face?
This is one subject or topic which is very, very close to anyone's heart who is working in the sustainable development sector, and I can actually speak, for a very long duration on that. Okay, but if we talk about net zero, which has to be achieved by 2070, so in my opinion, 2070 seems little less relevant at this point in time, and we should rather focus on 2030 targets, which we have been discussing nationally for quite some time. And India should seriously consider a peak coal year in this decade. The fact that, we are not only facing climate crisis, but we are also facing domestic ecological or social crisis due to reliance on the dirty fuel, which we call. And therefore, accelerated transition away from coal is very important at this point in time for India than any other country. So if I talk about the roadmap, We all know that our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, Narendra Modi, had made 5 pledges while addressing the high-level segment for heads of states and government at the UN COP26 summit at Glasgow. And the first one was that India will increase its non-fossil fuel capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. The second is that India will fulfill its 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy sources by 2030. The third one is that between now and 2030, India will reduce its total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030. The fourth is that India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by 45%. And the last and the most important is that India will achieve net zero by 2070. Although it is very ambitious, but it is definitely not impossible. In my opinion, rapid electrification for development and focusing on green electrification will make India achieve the target of net zero faster. Transmission, distribution, and storage would need a very, very rapid improvement with the strategy of green electrification. If I see the challenges today, but beyond coal, the challenge for the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and US, which is India, is the access to finance and technology. In my opinion, on both the ends, the developed nations have done precious little. The charge against them is validated by their inability to transfer low-cost debt for developing nations such as India, and the story remains the same with the technology transfer. So fundraising instruments such as green bonds have gained a lot of popularity, but India needs access to much larger pool of low-cost debt from the developed nations to ensure that the reduction of carbon emissions of 1 billion tons can be achieved by 2030. So India definitely faces many challenges, including heavy dependence on coal and lack of funding, but there is a need for clear direction of moving away from fossil fuels. For instance, this is because as a country, we are heavily dependent on coal. Another area of concern, which I have already mentioned, is the funding, and India's stumbling block is the availability of funding for the future technologies. And our Honorable Prime Minister also, while giving the 2070 target, mentioned that India needs an investment of around $10 trillion beginning now.
How are we going to meet all of these challenges, Arpit? What is the roadmap that we already have? You already said that right now our renewable targets, right? Like we need to meet 50%. India aims to meet 50% or about what? 500 odd gigawatts of 450 gigawatts of energy demand through renewable sources by 2030. So when we break down the targets and our ability to convert, like for instance, I was reading a report, where renewables from 2021 to 2022 end of year, we've not been able to really scale up as much as we should have. So obviously, as you said, there might be stumbling blocks in terms of technology, in terms of funding, in terms of India's ability to get there. But you also said that it is imperative because, we're a big consumer of fossil fuel, and for the climate and for our country to be able to progress and do it sustainably, it is important. So how do we then, sort of surmount these challenges?
So, two initiatives which have taken a lot of momentum one is the Jawaharlal Nehru Solar Mission, and which also equates to installation of 450 gigawatts of solar renewable energy by 2030, in which we are anticipating that around 350 gigawatts of solar alone would be deployed, more than 350 gigawatts of solar PV would be deployed by 2030. So this gives a lot of confidence and a lot of boost to our systems and to our country, not just in terms of electrification, not in terms of in energy generation, but also in terms of employment. So we also see a lot of foreign funding and foreign investment coming inside the country. We see a lot of domestic manufacturing taking a great boost in 2022. We have seen that. because of definitely we wanted to reduce the dependence on imports. So our domestic manufacturing capacity has substantially increased in 2022. So we are seeing that, there is a big shift. Solar is taking a very, very huge momentum. By recently we have launched the green hydrogen mission also, and the green hydrogen policy also has been in place. So these two areas, solar and green hydrogen, would take, and also electric vehicles would definitely take India to a very, very comfortable and amazing situation by 2030.
Right. So let's pick on each one of them. When it comes to solar, what is our capacity installed right now? And you said we want to be up to 300 gigawatts by 2030?
Around 350 gigawatts by 2030. That is, this looks fairly achievable also.
But there is a big road, there is a big gap that we still need to achieve, and all of that in the next 7 years.
7 years. And I would also like to tell you that, green hydrogen itself, because green hydrogen is done by breaking the water molecule through electrolysis. And when we say it green, it means that it is done through renewable energy sources. So green hydrogen itself would bring in around 125 gigawatts of capacity apart from this. So we look absolutely comfortable in terms of achieving this target.
So, India has made a big push for green hydrogen, right? Like $2.3 billion are to be invested in it. How optimistic are you that, green hydrogen will be the fuel of the future, given that there are experts who actually raised a couple of concerns? One of the concerns is that the costs of green hydrogen are significant, and it's unviable from a commercial perspective. The other problem or the other challenge which they pointed out is also the storage, which they say that it's volatile. And also the costs of desalination are very, very high and significant. And also currently there's a lack of industrial demand. So given all of these things, how do you see the viability of green hydrogen?
Okay, if we go to a little background of this, which is an important question on green hydrogen. So the announcement of the National Hydrogen Mission and making India as a global hub for green hydrogen production and export during the next 25 years. This was announced on 15th of August by Honorable Prime Minister of India. And this is a new opportunity, not just in terms of production, but in terms of skilling and jobs. So this was first announced in the Union Budget of 2021-22 in February 2021. Following this, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy was tasked to formulate a draft plan, frankly, with the aim to make India energy independent, decarbonize major sectors of the economy, such as steel, such as fertilizers, coal, all the energy intensive sectors. So the Union Cabinet has approved the National Green Hydrogen Mission with an initial outlay of around 9,744 crores. And announcing the cabinet decision, Union Information and Broadcasting Minister said in his program that this green hydrogen mission, this program, this aims to make India a global hub for the production of and export of green hydrogen and its derivatives also, which is green methanol and green ammonia. And this plan also, will be able to provide incentives to promote the manufacturing of low-cost green hydrogen in a bid cut emissions. So green hydrogen, in my opinion, will play a huge role in countering climate change, not just in the coming years, but for a very, very long duration of time. And also this target also aims to bring in an investment of around 8 lakh crores by 2030. And this would create over 6 lakh jobs. So nearly around 50 million metric tons per annum of carbon emissions are also be expected to be averted. So with all of this, if we see that there is so much of investment coming in, so much of technology transfer which is coming in, so the costs would certainly come down. But as you rightly said, currently production of green hydrogen is definitely almost 5 times more expensive than the conventional way of producing electricity. But with economies of scale, this would certainly come down to a very, very low level.
All right, Arpit, thank you very much for explaining that. And now this is my last question to you, and this is something that you spoke of on EVs, right? So EV is a big part of India's transition to sustainable mobility. And by 2030, it is estimated that India's EV market will be worth $200 billion. Now, to support the transition to EV, from your vantage, what is the infrastructure support which is required beyond just batteries? And how do we ensure this, by 2030? Again, because the timeline is really short. And finally, in terms of jobs, how do you see India being able to seize the opportunity for being the EV manufacturing hub?
Miloni, unfortunately, I would be, I would not be able to speak much on EVs because the EV sector comes under Automobile Sector Skill Council. The way we have Skill Council for green jobs, we have Automobile Sector Skill Council also. And of course, the solar EV charging station part definitely comes under us. And we have already developed a qualification on solar EV charging station. So now this is yet to be ascertained that whether the charging stations can be viable to charge the vehicles or through the solar panels, because then you would require a huge space. But conventionally charging the electric vehicles through the thermal way is not going to solve any problem. In fact, it is same as because you are ultimately using the fossil fuels. So our mandate in electric vehicles is only a development of the solar related electric vehicle charging station, because we do not see solar powered cars or solar powered trucks or buses coming in the near future. But definitely, because green hydrogen is our mandate, and I see that in future by 2030, a lot of electric vehicles, the buses, the trains, the heavy duty vehicles, they would be powered by green hydrogen, and green hydrogen would play a very significant role. As far as EV is concerned, I would say Automobile Sector Skill Council has a far bigger mandate to create jobs and to do research and development in that area.
But from the way that the Green Council is inputting into this, you spoke of the fact that your mandate is actually to lay out the solar panels when it comes to the charging stations and stuff like that. Tell us a little bit about that. How is that progressing? What is the infrastructure layout when it comes to that? What is the roadmap for that?
So, there are two ways of doing that. I recently happened to be a part of a stakeholders meeting where there have been few sites which have been identified in Delhi and in Mumbai, where solar EV charging station can be deployed. But as I told you, that it requires a lot of space to install the solar PV panels on the rooftop and then have a EV charging station below that. So one, space is a constraint. But then, the government, the private sector, as well as the PSUs, they are finding various alternatives for this. One of the alternatives is that, a lot of decentralized solar PV plants can be commissioned at one place, and EVs can be charged from the decentralized solar PV systems. Okay. The second one is that, a lot of solar PV modules can be installed on the municipalities or on the bus stands, and then the EV electric vehicles can be charged. So the government, the private players are yet to find a solution for it. But right now, currently, in my knowledge and my opinion, the conventional way of charging the EV is only taking place. But yes, I'm definitely very sure that in year and a half, we should be able to come up with some solutions when solar EV charging stations would be very much visible in the city, and the decentralized solar PV systems would be taking a major shift towards this.
Arpit, good luck with the mandate, with ensuring that we are green and sustainable, and we wish the Skill Council for Green Jobs all the very best. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Miloni. Thank you so much. It was indeed an honor and a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.